And now back to the grind of work. Tara, how was your weekend?
My weekend was fabulous. I don't think anyone else would agree, unless you're into hiking, mountains and stuff. But
My feet are hurting just by looking at your steps. Okay,
yeah,
just like
my Fitbit stats, yeah. Yeah, I summited the highest mountain in Southern California on Saturday. We did. We ended up doing 28 miles over the weekend, and we did 21 miles on Saturday and the other 7 on Sunday.
That is just insane.
Yeah.
Yep. What's that turn out to in terms of steps?
I think it was 68,000, 65,000, somewhere around there. I was kind of surprised because I've done 16 miles before, and that was like 45,000, and it's usually about 2,000 per mile, and so the math didn't work out, but I think just because how steep some of this was, it was much shorter steps, so my gait was different. I don't know.
So I probably shouldn't say this on the webcast, but a friend of mine, so I won't name names, is on one of those health insurance programs where you have to have a Fitbit, just in order to track how healthy you are, and so you have to hit a certain number of steps a day, or else your deductible goes up and your premium goes up.
Oh wow!
And so she,
that's harsh.
It's horrible. And so she put her Fitbit inside a sock and tied it to a ceiling fan so that it just jogs for her.
I've heard of putting it around your pet's collar, around the house.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So she's like, I'm going jogging.
6-year-old.
Yep.
Yeah, put it on your kid.
I don't think on the best day any of us would hit 60,000 steps even on a ceiling fan.
I didn't hit that last week. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, definitely. There's times where on a slow week it's 50,000. Yeah.
You think you hit that at Disneyland too?
I ate whatever I wanted and I still lost weight.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I think Disneyland usually is about 20,000 per day if you're walking ride to ride to ride to ride. I mean, you are just constantly walking. Yeah.
The weirdest thing is that Brent and I were in Atlanta last week, and I actually lost weight on that trip. I'm like,
so did I.
Brent Ozar last week. I lost weight. How is this possible? How?
I didn't go to Cracker Barrel.
We had like ribs and barbecue the first day, and we still didn't. We were vaguely good. We didn't eat the bread.
We had an entire pizza the last day.
Yeah. Not together, each individually.
Yeah, each had our own pizza.
Still lost weight, and it wasn't because we were working. We were sitting in a classroom all day.
Yep.
Yeah. It was the constant playing of footsie, arm wrestling. Yeah.
That was our secret.
Yes, so we went to Amazon Web Services training last week, went to architecture training, and see the latest and greatest on how to use their tools. It was a lot of fun, Sparked a lot of good discussions. I think this cloud thing's going to catch on. There's a lot of potential for it.
Yeah, it has potential.
Yeah, it's amazing how they don't use servers anymore. It's crazy.
Doesn't use servers anymore. Michael says, see, Doug doesn't talk directly into the mic. He knows how to do it.
That's because my stand is hitting my monitor.
We all have, all of us have different, completely different setups and configs.
You changed your headset,
this is a shotgun mic though. It's very directional, so yeah. I kind of have to have it where it's at. People also tell me that I sound like I'm in a different room if it's even that much farther away. So that's why it is where it is.
Yeah, my shotgun mic's in the closet, so I don't need it yet. And then you'd hear the piano practice going on in the other room, so it's not good.
Yeah, changed my headset, switched over to a new set because I just run through headsets like crazy, and so the other ones I just leave in my briefcase, and these suck actually, but whatever.
Is that one on your phone, or is that hooked up to computer audio?
It's hooked up to computer audio. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Do I not sound good? Uh-oh, don't say that.
Good.
Oh, okay, all right. None of you people sound good. It's crappy headphones though.
Yeah.
So how did you like these, Brent?
I didn't even use them because remember the conference didn't support voice over IP. I had to call in on my phone. Well, you would think in the year 2016 that it would be really easy for us to all talk with each other on any kind of device or whatever. No, instead I'm doing a webcast later this week that only uses Flash. You have to use Flash in your browser. You have to dial in on a landline. You can't use voice over IP. You have to make sure to feed the gerbils before you get started.
Yeah, well, remember, we're 16 years behind on the flying cars thing, so...
Yeah, robot butlers, still have to make my own toast. Yeah. All right, we might as well get started here. Let's see, we got all kinds of questions pouring in today. We got 75 folks in here. Let's go see what they're asking questions about. So let's see. Going through, got a whole bunch of Oh, Scott asks an interesting question. Scott says, how would you handle a new manager that insists his databases should not grow? That's
Insist
really
his business
interesting.
does not grow.
Yeah.
I like it.
Monster.com?
Yeah, you're never allowed to sell anything. You're never allowed to add new data. What I would do is make sure that he understands that update statements don't make the database grow, so if he updates your salary, take additional space in the database. It just changes an existing number.
I wonder if there's more to the question, though. Is the manager SQL Server savvy and is saying you pre-allocate it big enough that it never has to auto-grow? This is probably not a good manager, though. Doesn't understand SQL Server technology or databases in general.
We're quick to judge in these parts.
Scott says no, he is not technical. So yeah, that's.
And he's saying that SQL databases should not grow. That is just odd.
So if he's not technical, why is he giving technical advice?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
It's probably a budgeting thing. He's like, look, I got to keep my budgets the same number. It's very important. He says Scott says he's very used to monitoring the database. What you do is, I had I shouldn't say. Okay, well, I've started down the road, so I just might as well. So I had a manager once, not in my department, but in another department, who was asking anal things like that, like, oh, I want to make sure CPU never goes above 5%. So what we did was we hooked up his monitoring tool to point at a server no one used, and we just called it SQL whatever and told him that's where his stuff lived. And he was totally happy. He was completely happy. He thought we were amazing. Yep, that's my job. All right, so Gordon asks a related question. Gordon says, I'm not really sure what to set auto growth to on my very large databases. Usually when people say VLDB, they mean like a terabyte or above. He says, yes, I should be growing manually during a suitable maintenance window, but I also have an auto growth value set just as well in case. Is like 1 gig a good number, or what should I do for a 1 terabyte database?
I used 1 gigabyte on the larger databases, sometimes even maybe a little bit bigger. Just as long as you have the instant file initialization for the data files to so they can be zeroed out, so that the growth isn't a slow growth. Log files may be a little bit smaller. I did a lot of times 512. Sometimes I did 1 gigabyte, on larger databases where I knew the patterns and it was going to use a larger file for certain things. But I tried to pre-allocate those.
And IFI is something that comes on by default if you want it to in SQL 2016.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
There's a little checkbox that says, I want IFI to work with these, or with this installation.
Microsoft calls these things delighters. They're trying to add delighters into the product. I'm like, I am delighted. That's actually wonderful.
It's just faster.
It is faster. It's just faster. And they're right.
Okay.
I like
tell
it.
people to turn on anyway, so it works.
I have an interesting question from Wes. Wes asks, what are the most useful SQL Server certifications? So we'll go through and ask each folks for their opinion. Richie, we'll get started with you because you're on left on my monitor. What do you think the most useful SQL certifications are?
The one you have. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the only useful one.
The A+? Yeah. I'm pretty proud of that one.
That's it.
I can take a power supply and really just
Certified Scrum Master. That's no, the MCM, right? I mean, that's by far the most useful one you have. I mean, as soon as you get it, you're recognized as an expert anywhere.
You say that, but nobody still believes that I actually passed that test for rightful reasons.
What you
Tara, I wrote a check. It was a really large check. Then I brought another bag of 20s, and I gave that to the instructor, and off we went. Tara, how about you?
I'm against SQL Server certifications. A while ago, they had all these practice tests online, and I am a terrible test taker. And I felt like at the time I was really good at what I did. SQL Server, DBA for a long time, and I could not pass the test. So I feel like it's for people that don't have experience, that are just trying to get their foot in the door. I already had experience. I don't know that certifications are required at any job when you have as many years of experience as I do. But I could not pass the test. I also wasn't willing to study for these tests. Some of the stuff is just useless information I didn't need to know. So why add that stuff to my brain?
Doug, how about you?
It depends on how you define useful, because is it useful in the sense that it will get you a job, or is it useful in the sense that it will make you better at your job? Certifications will tell you what you don't know as you test for them, but apart from their value as actually holding the certification, there's very little value to it. It's the kind of thing where you decide if you want it on your resume or not, and in most cases it won't matter. Again, apart from exposing blind spots in what Microsoft thinks you should know about SQL Server, it's really not going to help you that much.
It does teach you a lot. Go ahead.
As a former hiring manager of both developers and data folks, I never looked at certifications at all. It didn't help you. It didn't hurt you. It just never come into the play because it's just a test. It's not exactly how you work, like Tara said. It's just a test.
I had one job that if you did do the certifications, that it was something to put on your review, that this is something that you work towards, and so it was a review cycle thing, a possible extra bonus or promotion, but it was just a bullet point on the review. You had all the other stuff on your review as well.
For the record, we don't bonus our employees that way. I'm like, yeah, no. If you want to take a test, that's cool. We'll pay for it. We pay for all the, and because we also pay for like passes or fails. It doesn't matter because I know from taking them too. I'm like, I walk in and look at the test. I'm like, they want you to know what? XML what?
And there'll be more than one right question or right answer. They want the most perfect answer, and it's like, well, there's 3 of them here that could be the right answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, the PMP was crazy like that. I mean, it was, oh, look, they're all right, but what's right or
yes.
And PMP, Project Management Professional?
Professional, yep.
There we go. Nate Johnson says, it may be a waste of 15 minutes of company time, but I do enjoy these pre-game antics. For those of you who just listen to the podcast, you miss out on, when you come in and join live, we just shoot the poop. There goes a bunch of old jokes, but I'm just going to keep writing. I'm not going down there. Tashal asks, is it possible to see the size of the plan cache using T-SQL? The answer is yes, and none of us know by memory. Yeah. There is a DMV for it. If you Google for that, there's a DMV for it, and in the show notes, we'll go find that and track it down for you. David asks, replication question, and then he never types it in. Oh, no, he does later in. We use replication extensively. In this scenario, what do you mean your scenario? Is this like a game show? Are you trying to test us? We have a bunch of reference tables that hardly ever change, replicated out to dozens of locations. Should we use transactional replication or snapshot replication or an ETL process, and just refreshing them once a day would be fine?
What are you the most comfortable managing?
Oh, look at that, Doug. Yeah, go on, elaborate.
Welcome back.
Now, if you feel really good about setting up some sort of SSIS package to do this, then by all means do and get away from replication. But this is the kind of thing where it really comes down to a comfort level. Replication will never be your best friend. It's too finicky and complicated and aggravating to work with. But it can get the job done. When you say finicky and complicated and aggravating to work with, that describes most of my best friends. So I'm not sure what you mean by, Richie's pointing at himself.
Yeah. I had a scenario like this for reference tables. We actually did not replicate them. The only time that these tables changed was during deployment. So if we needed them on the subscriber database, we just deployed to both the publisher and the subscriber for those tables. Yeah, that way we didn't have to add them to the publication, and there's not really any overhead as far as transactional snapshot, except when it has changes coming through. But why have them in there? If they hardly ever change, and it's part of a deployment process.
So James asks, what's the best practice for setting minimum server memory? There's a lot of guides out there on how you set max server memory, but what should I set min server memory to?
We use we took the max server memory, best practice, 4 gigabytes or 10%, whichever is greater, and then we divided it by 2, and that was our min server memory, and that was our standard across all servers.
I like that. I think in our setup guide it doesn't even give advice on it because we never. If that's your biggest problem, you're in really good shape. I love that you're asking this question because that's a really good detail-oriented question.
We had the standard because we were mostly a clustered environment. We had, I don't even know how many clusters, maybe 100 clusters or so, and a lot of them were active. Not a lot of them, but some of them were active, and you want to make sure that when the failover occurs and you're running on one node, that the SQL instances, the one that has to fail over, can get memory, or So we would set max down also in the active environment.
Yeah. It also kind of depends on how much you're piling on that server, because if it's your Swiss Army knife server, you know, you're probably going to have trouble if you're trying to run Exchange and other stuff on it. But you know, if you're running small business and you've got, you know, all the BI stack running on it too, then you want to make sure that under no circumstances can other stuff steal away from SQL Server to the point where your database engine is actually beginning to starve a little bit. So keep in mind whatever else is on that box. If you really just have a dedicated SQL Server database engine box, then yeah, it's not going to be as big a deal because it'll take whatever it needs, and there really won't be competition for that memory in terms of like it getting stolen away.
Mandy asks, we've got SQL Server 2014 and our tempdb files are on local solid state drives. Recently, we're starting to see higher and higher I/O weights on those tempdb files, upwards of 800 milliseconds. I'm new to solid state. Is this a normal or is this indication of a problem? Ooh, that's a good question. My guess is, so depending on how old the solid state drives are, their write speed actually degrades over time. It can get worse over time. The other thing that's tricky is depending on how many files you have, if you spider out tempdb to say 1 file per core and you've got 24 cores, solid state may not be able to handle that workload as well. So generally we aim for either 4 or 8 tempdb files when we first configure a server. This is one of those instances where more can actually harm you rather than having fewer. But I would just check to see. You can run Crystal Disk Mark against those solid state drives and see if write speed has degraded since they were new. It's certainly not normal though. Wes asks, are any of you speaking at the PASS Summit? Well, all of us will be speaking. We're all going to be standing around the hallway talking to all of our friends. Are we going to be presenting? That we don't know yet. That announcement comes out today, so we'll find out later today. I keep looking over at Twitter to see whether or not it's come out, and then it hasn't come out. So as soon as it comes out, we'll say something. Wes says, and I have no idea what this is in reference to, use Walmart as a precedent. Always like that. That sounds like it.
Enough said. I don't think we need to say any more about that.
For the Adios Pantalones shirt.
No, that's probably true. Let's see here. Next up, Tim asks. Tim says, I'm fighting for only using stored procs. I don't want to use inline SQL even for simple queries. My developers are fighting against this, and they want to use things like Entity Framework. Am I wrong for pushing hard for only using stored procs?
I have a lot of experience on this topic. I was very, very pro store procedures for the longest time, and slowly, as developers change, they wanted to use prepared statements, parameterized queries from the applications, and we didn't want to stop them from the rapid development that they were doing, so we did allow that. Once we realized that the performance was the same between store procedures and prepared statements, parameterized queries, it became okay from a performance standpoint. However, from a security standpoint, you're having to give access to the tables rather than just to the store procedures. So that was just something that we had to think about. But as far as Entity Framework goes, I know Richie's very pro Entity Framework. Entity Framework and what's the other one? And Hibernate. There are some bad things that it does that can really harm performance, and so it's something that you have to watch out for. They use nvarchar as their data type for variables, for string variables, and if your database is using varchar, you're going to have a table scan on those when you do a comparison in the where clause, and you'll be able to tell in the execution plan. It'll say an implicit conversion occurred, and you'll see that it said nvarchar, and you'll be like, "Well, why? Your table is using varchar." It's because of the application. Specified nvarchar. It's something that you can override, but if you're not overriding it, this is what they're going to do.
So this just in, that is not a bug. That is a problem with the developer's code. They didn't specify that the column was a varchar. So because .NET uses Unicode as their string type, it automatically assumes everything's nvarchar. So there's a way that we could go in and say, hey, this column is nvarchar, and that will cause the implicit, if you don't do that, that will cause the implicit conversions. That's only if you're using code first. If you're using the designer does the right thing and does doesn't put the n in front of it, so it doesn't put it as a nvar so you get that implicit conversion. So that's only for code first, and if the developers aren't really doing the right things when they're doing their mappings in code. So, and just because I have Julie Learman's phone number doesn't mean that I'm pro internet. Okay, so it's
you're
there.
Pro because you speak about it. You present about on the topic.
Oh, okay. So if you go to the pre-con, you'll hear me talk more about it, but it's more of a it's a balanced way. We're not going to be able to tell developers not to use it. Microsoft is saying to use it. So if you're saying that, then you're saying don't do what Microsoft says, and that's a much bigger uphill battle than you probably want to face as a DBA. So the general rule of thumb is, hey, usually for most things it's okay, but for complex things, if it's going to be complex in the SQL, it's going to be complex in the link, and now there's 2 hops it's got to go through to figure out what the actual plan is. Once it's got to change that link into a SQL statement, and then it's got to change that SQL statement into a plan, and that's probably going to be 50 pages long, which nobody ever wants. So at that point, cut your losses, then do a sort procedure, and everybody's okay. But there's a big difference between when we have to write SQL as developers, when we're typically not very good at it, as opposed to, oh, here, let me just do context.tablename.get, and then it just does it for us. So there's a speed issue here to development, and there's usually a lot more developers than there are of you. So unless you want to stay up all night writing SQL statements.
Is that a threat?
Yeah, but you guys paid more than us, so I don't understand what that is either.
John says, I just saw your announcement about pre-con training in Seattle. Do you guys offer group discounts? We do, actually. If you're going to get 5 or more seats, shoot us an email at help@brentozar.com, or just go to brentozar.com and click on Contact up at the top. And then you can contact us, tell us which class you want to go to, and we can, for 5 or more seats, we give group discounts there. Gordon asks, if I've got an Azure VM that replicates data, I want to send it down to an on-premises database. It's a VM. It's not using Azure SQL database. What are my HA and DR options?
It's unusual to go in that direction.
Yeah,
I don't have an answer, but I've never heard of anyone doing that.
Should be able to use replication, log shipping, always-on availability groups. Anything you can use on-premises, you can use up in Azure VMs. I got to be really careful when I say that. The hard part, of course, is getting the VPN connection between on-premises and your on-site stuff. That's where things get to be a bit of a pain in the rear. Jennifer Qualls asks, is the MCM still available? No, they broke the mold after I got mine, thank goodness.
Yeah, 2008 R2 was the last version, right? I mean, it was the only version, really. It's been a while.
Let's see. Kyle Johnson asks, I try not to use last names, but Kyle, that's a generic enough last name, and your question's so cool, it doesn't matter. It's totally okay. You shouldn't be ashamed of this question. It's a good question. I'm not just saying that to get you a gold star on the fridge. He says, I was on a webinar yesterday where you covered SP Blitz Index. Are you aware of any scripts or programs that suggest Columnstore indexes? Or is there anything that I would look at in order to learn whether or not Columnstore is a good fit for me? Everyone is silent, so there's your answer. The closest I would go to is Nikoport, nikoport.com. Nico Mujibur, he's from Portugal. He's got a really hard to pronounce last name. Has lots of information about Columnstore indexes. He's like Mr. Columnstore. Tim says, I've just inherited a data warehouse project. Well, you have really crappy relatives, Tim. With 5 weekly updated data marts. The largest table is closest to 300 million rows, and it's approaching a terabyte. My loads are taking longer than usual. What's the best way to diagnose performance tuning on stuff like this? So a data warehouse that's got a bunch of data marts, tables approaching a terabyte, my loads are taking longer. Where should I look for performance tuning?
What is it waiting on?
What is it waiting on, and how do you find that out?
You run a query, a save script. I don't have the DMPs memorized, but you're going to want to see what the. I mean, you could run SP who is active, I guess. I assume that would work in this environment, and see what the while it's running, see what it's waiting on. Is it a disk issue, something else?
My favorite, of course, because I'm me, is SP Ask Brent. SP Ask Brent, if you run it with the sense startup equals 1 parameter, sense startup equals 1 will tell you what your wait stats have been since startup.
The script formerly known as SPS, Brent.
Yeah, we're running a contest now to figure out a new name for it because we just open sourced a whole bunch of our scripts, and I don't want to have it called SPS Brent anymore because the strangers are going to start checking in code, and I don't want that answer to be reflecting on me. I asked Brent, and it said I was a moron. I don't do that in the stored procedures.
That's already in there.
Yeah, it's in right at the end. Let's see here. Ankit asks, how do I troubleshoot SQL recompilations increasing on SQL Server? So there's a perpmon counter, recompilations a second, and recompilations is increasing. What should he go look at?
Did anyone recently add option recompile?
Ooh, okay.
Anything?
All right, I like that.
Like someone may have tried to solve a parameter sniffing problem on a frequently run query. Just one idea.
Some yo-yo could be running update stats continuously. You can capture a profiler trace. This is horrible. You could capture a profiler trace and capture compilation events, and that will tell you which SQL is doing it. How else would I troubleshoot that? Oh, no. You know, I'm surprised Tara didn't ask the question. It's a question that we usually ask. What's the problem that you're trying to solve? What led you to recompilations a second as being an issue that you want to track down? That's an interesting thing.
I wonder if it's due to, you know, they say that your recompilations should be like 10% or under of your compilations. I wonder if that's something that they're monitoring. Maybe that's increased, or maybe it's a counter that they're already tracking and the number has gone up.
Yeah,
but
I don't think any of
it's
those.
a problem.
Yeah, have any of you guys ever run into a situation where that was like the problem? Recompilations a second?
No.
That's a perpmon counter that I always pull up along with the compilations, and I just take a quick peek at it, and then I delete those two counters from the screen. It's a very, very quick peek.
Yes, yeah, that's really.
Now, of course, if recompilations are occurring more frequently, you probably have more CPU hits. So, you know, if you see that your CPU has risen, maybe it is something to look into.
Like if you put a gun in my head and said make up a problem where recompilations a second is the big issue, like if I had a table that was continuously being truncated and then repopulated, truncated, and repopulated, where the stats are changing fast enough that was causing compilations, but even then I don't think it's going to be too many recompilations a second, so that's a really good question. Oh, Tim asks a great question. This isn't Tim, the other Tim, who also asked a great question as well. It's a different Tim. Is performance tuning approached differently from a transactional system versus an analytical system? When you approach an online system versus a reporting system, do you do troubleshooting for performance any differently?
I don't as far as reporting, but I've never really supported a true OLAP environment.
Yeah, there are so many options that don't apply to a regular OLTP environment that do apply to OLAP. Specifically, you're talking about cubes because they're all different kind of models that you can do. You can do hybrid, you can do rolap, molap, all different ways of kind of choosing how much of that data you want to compile ahead of time. So the troubleshooting process would be very different if you're talking about SSAS cubes, for example. If you're talking about the source data, usually people don't care about the underlying data because that ends up, in some other final format like a cube. So, I guess if I were to look at a database that was just straight, what would that be? It's been a while. Rollup, I think, where you get it right out of the database. Then I suppose I would use some of the same troubleshooting steps, like looking at weight stats, looking at long-running queries, and so on and so forth. But if you're talking about like troubleshooting a cube, that's a whole different bag from OLTP.
Adam asks, I just said Adam asks. It's not that your question's bad. I didn't say it was a good question. It's just still a good question. I can only say good question every time, or else people won't take me seriously. How would you approach doing replication in AGs? So if I have the publisher in an availability group, do I have to reconfigure replication again when I fail over to my DR replica?
So the distributor isn't supported as far as AG. So if the DR environment has its own distributor, the answer is yes, you do. Hopefully you're scripted, and hopefully when you have done a failover to DR, it wasn't an automatic event. Usually because DR is so far apart, you can't have automatic failovers occur. So if it's a manual DR, hopefully you were in a downtime window, all the applications were down, you made sure that there was no data that was left behind that hadn't been fully sent to the subscriber, and if that's the case, you just need to run your scripts to start up replication again right where you left off. You don't have to do it. You don't have to reinitialize. This is a topic that I've done quite a bit. Failover to DR using replication AGs. Pretty much every technology.
Now we have a bad question from Nate. I'm not going to lie, this question is bad, Nate. You shouldn't feel bad, but it's a bad question. He says, is a self-referencing linked server as slow as a real linked server, and is it generally a bad idea or not? How's that work, guys?
What problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah, exactly.
Why are you self-referencing itself?
The only time I've seen people do this, and it wasn't a good idea then either, but I'm just gonna repeat what they did. So they had linked servers inside their code so that they could have the same code whenever they moved it from server to server, and then sometimes they would have reporting servers where they changed the linked server to point somewhere else. They thought that somehow doing linked server queries was gonna abstract that away, like they could move some of the tables at some point to another server. Yeah, so for those of you who are only listening to the audio version and not seeing our faces, none of our faces are happy at this point. We're all sad. Sadly, it is as slow as a regular quote-unquote linked server. SQL Server doesn't know that that's a remote server. Let's see here. What's up next? All kinds of questions here. Nate says, oh, the context, he has a replicated view that points at two servers. That's really, so what you should do, because this is a kind of a multi-paragraph thing. He's got a few things inside there. Post this on dba.stackexchange.com. Post in as much details as you can and talk about what the problem is you're trying to solve. Generally, when we talk about doing reporting servers, we'd rather scale up than scale out to multiple servers, and you kind of see why here. Managing multiples is kind of a pain in the rear.
I think that the answer should be just don't use linked servers, though. If you need to be able to contact another server, do that through the application, not within SQL Server. Programming languages can handle this. Joining two different data sets together.
Yeah. Connor Cunningham has a great talk at SQL Bits when he talks about the difficulties of distributed queries, and it's pretty bad. Let's see. Nate also asks. Nate redeems himself by asking another question. Nate says, finally, a backup software question. What do you guys prefer in terms of backup software? There's a bunch of different versions out there. Whose tools should I buy? Are they all compatible with OLA's scripts? I think OLA scripts work with everything at this point, like Idera, Redgate, and Lightspeed. In terms of who we prefer, we're kind of vendor agnostic since we don't have to manage anybody's backup software. But just in terms of experience, we'll go through and ask. Richie, have you ever used third-party backup software, and how was your experience, and which ones were they?
I've never used backup software.
All right, Richie doesn't use backup. He just puts things in GitHub and lets the rest of the world back up his source code.
I let the DBAs handle that.
Tara, how about you?
I have a long answer. So, I've been using SQL Server a long time, and backup compression didn't exist in older versions. So yes, we started off with Quest Lightspeed. Worked really, really well. It was fairly expensive. We wanted to get the Redgate's SQL tool belt, and they gave us a deal, and we were able to get the backup software. We were able to completely replace all of our Lightspeed licenses, which we had already paid for. It's not like we got a refund from all these, and we put Redgate out there instead. And the reason why we did this is because all new incoming servers were going to use the Redgate's software instead. So it made sense to have one tool rather than multiples. But both of them, we did testing. We did a ton of testing on. They pretty much produced the same compression ratio, the same file size, the same restore time. I mean, absolutely everything was with the difference was so minor, and one was just cheaper than the other.
Yeah, so everything's negotiable. I think back like 10 years ago, there might have been differences. Today's not so much. Doug, how about you? Have you used any third-party backup tools?
I yield my time to the consultant from California.
Nice. Yeah, I've used all of them as well. I'm like, they're all good. Anything's better than trying to roll your own.
And yes, I mean, they definitely are compatible with OLA, especially the two that he's listed. I know you said that you probably aren't. These two specifically are.
Uh-huh. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that wraps up our time for today. Thanks, everybody, for coming and hanging out with us, and we will see you guys next week. Adios, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.